well.
Anyway, we're recording now, so I'll be good.
Okay. So it gives me great pleasure to have the task of introducing our speakers today. And I'm going to begin with Alessandro Mazzola, who is one of 4 postdoctoral research fellows on the social impact of music making project, which is led by John Sloboda at the Guildhall School of Music and Drama. So Alessandro's PhD is in political and social sciences from the University of Liège in Belgium. And he's also affiliated to the Centre for Ethnic and Migration Studies at the University of Liège and the Group for Research on Ethnic Relations, Migration and Equality at the Free University of Brussels. And am I right in thinking you're in Brussels at the moment, Alessandro? Yes. So Alessandro's BA was in intercultural communication and his MA was in show business and media sciences at the University of Naples, Suor Orsola Benincasa. He's carried out research on the cultural expression and participation of immigrant minorities in Australia and Europe, the function of cultural practices in contexts of ethno-cultural and political conflict in Italy and Belgium, and public opinion and mobilization against, I assume, asylum seekers in Europe. And his main publications are in the field of the sociology of culture, with a particular focus on music, the relationship between popular culture and power in contemporary societies, the integration of minorities with a focus on migration and the refugee question, and political debate on populism, xenophobia, and the extreme right. And with that biography, I am not at all surprised that he was snapped up to be a postdoc on this project. So to turn to John Sloboda, John is currently research professor at the Guildhall School of Music, where he directs its Understanding Audiences research programme. And so, as several of us know, he is also emeritus professor at Keele, and he was a staff member of the School of Psychology at Keele from 1974 to 2008, where he was director of its unit for the study of musical skill in development, which was founded in 1991, and where I did my PhD under John's supervision. So John is internationally known for his work on the psychology of music. His book, I'm sorry, it's just fallen out of my head. The Musical Mind, it was 1985, was an absolutely seminal work. It was the first real book on the cognitive psychology of music. So John's a fellow of the British Psychological Society. He's been president of both the psychology and the general sections of the British Association for the Advancement of Science. He was president of the European Society for the Cognitive Sciences of Music, and he served on the editorial board of its journal Musica Scientiae. He's a committee member of the Society for Education and Music Psychology Research, and he was editor-in-chief of its journal, Psychology of Music, between 85 and 89. He was the recipient of the 1998 British Psychological Society's President's Award for distinguished contributions to psychological knowledge. And in 2004, he was elected to Fellowship of the British Academy, which is something that John takes very seriously. It's a great honour, and he's very active in it. He's a contributing researcher to the AHRC Knowledge Exchange Hub Creative Works in London. And I remember when this began, he's a co-director of Every Casualty Worldwide and co-founder of the Iraq Body Count. And he hasn't put on that particular biography, but he was also chair of the Oxford Research Group, another very important peace-building project. He's chair of the London Friends of Music Fund, which is an organisation devoted to the supply and repair of musical instruments to young people in countries in need around the world. And he is founding member and president of the International Research Platform Social Impact of Music Making, which was created in August 2017. And the next special issue of Musica Scientiae, which I'm now the editor-in-chief, the next special issue is going to appear in September, and it will be devoted to this vital topic. And you should know also that John was once upon a time a seriously aspirant pianist. He's been a composer, he conducted the Keele Bach Choir for many years, and he still enjoys singing, particularly choral music. So I'm going to hand over to you, John, first. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jane, for that very generous introduction. Alessandra and I are very pleased to be here. only virtually. I have many fond memories of in situ visits to the Royal Northern College of Music, the last of those being the participation in the ESCOM conference of 2015, which Jane was co-chair of, and very happy memories from that visit. I hope to be physically in the school before too long. Alessandro, I think we're ready to go. If you'd like to share your screen. Thank you very much indeed. So this has got a splendid array of logos of the various participating and supporting bodies. But the title of our study is Music for Social Impact. And you might well ask, what are we talking about when we are talking about music for social impact as a practice? Well, it's a broad practice, and some of its boundaries are a bit fuzzy, but and contested even, but there are some very clear exemplars which sit in the center and very definitely what we're talking about. So next slide, please. This is a typical, if you like, music for social impact organization or project. Why is it such? First of all, it has a very clear target group. And that target group is not defined by the musical skill or affiliation or musicality of the group, but by some social characteristic, in this case, people affected by homelessness. It has a clear social aim. In this case, improve their well-being and build their social networks. It runs participatory music experiences with experienced leaders, working with people of a wide range of abilities and backgrounds. And it is the musical activity which is the vehicle for its impact, its social impact. And there are thousands of such projects and organizations worldwide. The next slide, please. So this is our project, and these are some of the people in it. I'm the principal investigator, and my co-investigators are Heidi Westerlund, Jeff Baker, Andy Bishop, and Gloria Zapata Restrepo, with 4 postdoctorals, including Alessandro, who is working on the UK part of this project, but also Sari Katinen, Anamon Van Zyl, and Juan Sebastian Rojas. And we are funded by a generous grant from the Arts and Humanities Research Council, but also from the SIM platform itself, which I'll say a little bit more about later on. So please, the next slide. Just a bit about the background. This actually arose from interactions between researchers in different countries, which was facilitated by the SIM platform, the Social Impact of Making Music, which is a newly formed research platform. And if you don't know about it, I do encourage you to go and have a look at the website. It has a range of activities and communications which really help the field internationally to move forward. Our project is designed to fill what we saw at the time as a gap in research. If you look at the type of research which is going on in this field, a great deal of it focuses on specific individual projects, such as Streetwise Opera, with an interest particularly in who the participants are in those projects and how this activity benefits them socially and personally. Our research project takes a rather different lens. It's looking at many projects in the 4 countries we've chosen, not just one. And the specific focus or lens is looking at the musicians who work in these projects, who have been somewhat neglected in some of the other studies. Next slide, please. There are 4 countries in the project: Belgium, Colombia, Finland, and UK. Why these 4? Well, they are countries where there is senior research capacity able to take up the CI role, closely connected to music higher education. And one of the important hoped for outcomes of this project is indeed to impact on aspects of music higher education. These 4 countries represent different cultural contexts and stages of development of this type of work. But of course, it's not a complete picture. And so we are committed to making our research protocols public so that any other country who wants to use our protocols to adapt to study the field in their own area is very welcome to do so. Next slide, please. So quickly on the progress to date, we of course constituted the research team. The first phase of the research was to scope the context and environment in each country and make, as far as we can, a representative compilation of the known project in each country. And the outcome of phase A is already published. It was published last month in the Finnish Journal of Music Education, which is a free open access journal. But it's also on the Guildhall website, and just for convenience, Alessandra is going to, I think, put the URL there into the chat for anybody who wants to grab it and have a look at the full article, but we will summarize some of the highlights of it in a moment. Phase B used the contacts that we discovered in phase A to issue a wide call for participation in a preliminary survey aimed at practitioners, musicians doing this work. The survey was launched in October 2020, and it ran for 3 months, closing in January of this year. And 631 responses were received, of which 318 were complete. Now that actually means that the research is based on those 318, because the very last page of the online survey asked for permission to use the data. And so people who copped out of the survey before the end, we can't actually use that data. Next page, please. And moving into the future, we are just today beginning phase C, which is in-depth interviews with more than 100 practitioners chosen from those who responded to the survey and indicated a willingness to be contacted again. And phase D, which will be later this year, is going to be 12 case studies, which will involve not simply the musicians that we've interviewed, but managers, stakeholders, recipients as well, to get a more in the round picture of 12 carefully chosen organizations. And then into 2022, we're moving to dissemination, and we want to have both country-based practitioner dissemination workshops in local languages, but there'll also be an international conference in English. We haven't decided on the location yet. And presentations and publications for practitioners, researchers, policymakers, and the general public. And very close to our heart, specific dialogue with pedagogical institutions, such as conservatoires, who can be involved in the training and development of SIM practitioners. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to take you through very briefly some of the highlights from the phase A scoping study. The methodology we used was a mixture of web search and feedback from selected experts and scientific literature and policy documents. Web search, for example, looking at umbrella organizations who support and fund this work, and then following links from the organizations we found to other organizations which they relate to or work with or are funded by, and also Google search on certain keywords. And the feedback from experts, though, these were 11 people known to us in the UK, well-networked senior individuals, and they're named in the Finnish Journal report, and a range of scientific literature and policy documents. Next slide, please. Some highlighted findings from this first phase. First, some similarities across the 4 countries. It's clear that this area of work is growing in size and in strategic importance in all the 4 countries. We suspect that means that that also is replicated in other countries. This work is getting more and more important, established, and prominent in the landscape, but also as a source of employment for musicians. The projects that we've discovered show a very high dependence on public funding, that funding that comes one way or another from government, though not exclusively. There's a strong emphasis in all countries on working with children and young people. And there is a particularly widespread adherence to principles of access to culture and social inclusion as driving this work. What we also found was that there was a quite wide range of musical genres and forms. So in other words, the El Sistema model, which is of course very well known, where a large number of people come together to play Western classical music, is not by any means typical of the field. these days. Next slide. There were some differences between countries as well, interesting differences. So we found in the European landscape a quite significant focus on disability and on work with older people, whereas in the Colombian context, there was a much larger focus, as one could understand, given the context and history, on post-conflict reconciliation. Also interesting differences in how the target groups are defined. In the UK, there is a very strong and explicit discourse of deficits and needs. For example, in the example we showed at the beginning, Streetwise Opera, they come right out and say that their interest is in homeless people. This contrasts with a rather more subtle and understated definition of target groups in the Belgian and Finnish cases, where it's much more likely that their websites will talk about inclusivity and welcome to all. Linked to that, there's a UK focus on measurable and specific social and personal outcomes. So many projects are really quite clear and quite definite about what outcomes they're actually seeking. Whereas other countries focus, again, in a rather more soft way on general cultural enhancement. And finally, there is a difference in the priority given to artistic excellence of the outcomes. This seems to matter, possibly to funders, in Belgium and the UK, but less so in Colombia, which prioritizes cultural affirmation and post-conflict relief, and Finland, which emphasizes the professional quality of the practice rather than the artistic quality of the outcome. Next slide, please. So we've got some questions which Phase A raises in our mind for going forward. One is there an underlying commonality in the formation and beliefs and practices of the practitioners in these countries which transcends cultural differences? In other words, are we beginning to see the emergence of a global discipline, or is it rather a network of local disciplines which are beginning to some extent to talk to each other? A second question is, how does the national context influence practitioners? Is there, as it were, a prevailing discourse, or, as is possibly more likely, is the variation within a country as great as that between countries? A third question is, how strong is the critical narrative? Does each country have a mixture of practitioners, some of which are perhaps huge enthusiasts, one might even say apostles of this practice and what it can do, others who are perhaps more pragmatic and realist, and maybe even some who are skeptical of the value of this kind of work at all? And final question, what can we learn from all of this which will help to train and develop the practitioners of the future? So, next slide, please. We're now going to dive into a closer look just at the UK data. And so the rest of the presentation focuses on the UK alone. There are 104 UK websites that we surveyed and data from 11 expert informants. And in Phase B, we're looking at 98 complete surveys. So the next slide, please. One of the things we saw is there is a division between organizations, sometimes quite large organizations, that can have multiple projects going on within them, often with their own sub-web page. So, for example, there is the Sage Gatehead listed there, which has some 6 sub-projects, but of course does many things which would not fall within the purview of this research as well, just straightforward performing activities. But there are also quite a lot of organizations who are very focused and just do one thing. And Streetwise Opera would be a very good example of those individual projects. Next slide, please. The projects are geographically spread. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. Some are national organizations, some are city-based, some are regional-based, some are based in a very specific location. The little red dots show the ones which are very specifically located, and as you can see, there's quite a preponderance of projects in London and the Southeast, but also there's a secondary cluster in the Manchester area. Next slide, please. This is an analysis of the stated recipients of the work. And as you can see, there are 4 categories which account for a vast majority of the target groups, the largest being children and young people, the next largest being disabled, the third largest being minority groups, and the fourth largest being people suffering from some kind of socioeconomic deprivation. But there are many other smaller categories of recipients in the landscape as well. So it's a very varied, diverse landscape. Next slide, please. This slide is a bit busy and maybe the text is a bit small, but some of the data is reproduced down the right-hand side. This is the dozen or so most frequently described descriptors of what the social, i.e. the non-musical aim of the particular activity is. And developed skills is the most frequent of these. And by skills here, we mean non-musical skills. So skills which are related to employability, relationship building, and so on. And then, as you can see, confidence, creativity, inclusivity, well-being, self-esteem are quite frequently recurring aims of this kind of work. Next slide, please. This gives an analysis of the funding sources. PU meaning public, and PU plus meaning a mixture of public and private being mainly charities, trusts, and foundations. And as you can see, there are 2 mega funders which account for a very large amount of the work that's being done in this country, the Arts Council England and the Youth Music Organisation, which funds work particularly among young people. But there are a number of other smaller but very effective organizations as well. Next slide, please. And this is all under the umbrella of public policy for the arts, which provides the rationale, the justification, and a great deal of the funding for this kind of work. And in a synthesis of a range of major policy documents, both from government and from some of the funding organizations, and this is work that Alessandro has mainly done, has identified these 6 key principles which underlie the work. It's about pursuing excellence in cultural production, strong focus on stimulating creativity, nurturing talent, and targeting disadvantage among young people, an increase in the overall engagement and access to the arts, regardless of education, socioeconomic background, geographical context, ethnicity, and so on. The work contributes to the health and well-being of individuals and communities, and it increases the sector's resilience and the range of funding options, and contributes towards boosting national local economy and the international standing of British culture, or what is sometimes called soft power. That's, I think, the end of my part of the contribution. I'm going to hand now to Alessandro to take us through the findings of the survey. And this is the first outing of these findings.
Yes, thank you, John. Thank you very much for this introduction. Well, just take you through the survey data and some preliminary findings for us. As John has mentioned, the survey was actually included a part that for us worked as a recruitment strategy for the next research phase. So we actually conceived the survey as a recruitment tool, and so we wanted to know more about the practitioners in order to be able to inform our selection. Then when we found ourselves in the moment of designing and structuring the survey, it was full pandemic. So we found very useful that we could have perhaps asked more in the survey. So we decided to make something more structured and to adapt to the situation, and perhaps using the survey also as a main data collection tool. So we we basically did not change our target constituency that here is represented. So musicians, actually active musicians working in the community and concerned with these musical and social goals. And we provided examples to describe this specific kind of activity by pointing at the target groups that are involved in the activity, and so including people from disadvantaged regions or living in specific socio-cultural and socio-economic conditions, but also groups characterized by personal specific conditions such as disability or being part of an ethnic minority, etc. And then on the other hand, another example, another set of examples we gave to our potential participants to identify themselves as being eligible for taking the survey was concerned the question of the impact of their work, of their activity. So including all different social goals spanning from inclusion, empowerment, achieving community building, etc. This is a survey methodology, which is interesting as well, maybe for those of you who are doing research. We actually used the data collected in phase A, so the inventory of organizations and activities, to spread a call for participants. Because in that phase, in phase A, we had collected also the contacts, the email addresses of organizations and individual practitioners, and of course we also posted the call for participants online, and we released a press release. And perhaps here another interesting strategy was to get into Facebook groups, relevant Facebook groups, in order to share the call as much as possible. Last point here concerns what John has already mentioned. So the point that the survey worked as a recruitment strategy. So we had to ask. It is completely anonymous, but we had to ask at a certain point in the questionnaire if the participant wanted to give their contacts and be eventually contacted for participating to the one-to-one interviews we are starting today. Okay, just a brief outline of the survey structure. As John said, we had 98 responses, full responses in the UK. And the survey consisted of 27 optional questions. 13 of these were open-ended questions with free text, so quite I mean, participation was something perhaps maybe time-consuming for the participants. So that's why we are quite happy with 98 full responses. It was a thick questionnaire to be filled in. We calculated that for a complete response, the complete survey could take also even half an hour. And also in the 14 questions we structured with the multiple choice options. We included always a field for comments, so there was a lot of participants had to write their answers actually. Okay, of the 5 sections, apart from the introduction and the contacts, we had 3 core sections that are reflection of the core issues of our project. So first of these is the social musical activities in which participants have been involved in the last 5 years. We limited this to the last 5 years in view of the possible inclusion of cases to observe. So we wanted something actually going on, still active. In this section, we also asked question about the kind of activity, the target group, and of course, also about the intended social, musical and non-musical outcomes. Second section of this three is the one concerning perhaps the most interesting section for you and for the context of this seminar today, concerning background and training of practitioners. And we included also a question about the feeling of being well equipped to carry on this type of SIM activity, but of course also actual question on the actual training and education of the musicians in different with different articulations. I will explain later. And then the third section is about the observation and perspective. So the point of view, the actual point of view of practitioners about different things. First of all, the personal importance given to this kind of work, if this is part of a more varied, large, and more diversified career or professional activity. And also a question about the perceived level of support to this kind of activity given by different constituencies, including the government, but also the media, the context of higher education, music higher education, or the general public, for example. And lastly, two questions which are quite important. I think we got very interesting answers, very interesting response to both questions. One question about the obstacles, and of course, one last question about the impact of COVID on the work. This last question was hidden. So participants were asked first if they wanted to respond to a question about COVID, and then if they selected yes, the question popped up. Okay, just very briefly going through the data, we were quite happy about distribution, geographical distribution of the sample, as it was it reflected the scoping we did in phase A, with an important share of projects and activities going on in London and the Southeast, but also in as you see in Northern England, for example, and in Manchester, Liverpool areas. Concerning the working context and role, this is interesting too. Very briefly, we remarked that small organization of less than 12 co-workers and single musicians taken together, so let's say smaller entities, account for the majority of the cases we have collected in our sample. And in the pie here, you can see, on the other hand, the share of participants who indicated to work with, to have direct approach to the work, so to directly work with the public. We were very happy because 94 of the 98 responses were from people working directly with the public, or 34 of them having also tasks as organizers and managers of the activity. We got only 2 responses from people who were only organizers and managers, so not involved in the indirect work. Which was our main target group. So quite good outcome. Okay, going into the details here of the questions about the qualification, education and training. This is the question about the feeling of being equipped for the job, for the work. And it was actually the last question of the section, but we did not get any surprising or extremely interesting information from this question, I have to admit, because of course the vast majority of our sample indicated to feel well equipped, either mostly or totally equipped. and a very little share indicated to be barely or partially equipped, and no one indicated not feeling equipped at all. So this is a very polarized response towards the positive feeling. More interesting are perhaps the questions about the actual training, in this case, the musical training, the musical qualifications. Interesting to note that an important part of the sample indicated not to have any higher music education qualification, and to have specific trainings that are mostly based on informal context of training, such as private tuition, for example, and also the interesting data here, interesting finding here is that this kind of the formal musical training is very diversified in a sense, and I particularly focus on these data, the 30 participants with the master qualifications, because within this group we found that 14 of them had the master degree with mixing musical and social content, and in particular 5 of them undertook a music therapy master, 5 a leadership master, and 3 a community music master qualification. 2 of them had a doctorate, but they didn't specify the topic actually. Okay, so we asked the question about the musical qualification, but also non-musical qualification and skills, and here the response was quite interesting too. 61 participants indicated that they have other non-musical skills and qualifications, and here you have the 5 different fundraising, communication, manager, researcher, and therapist. These are 5 predetermined options we provided them with. And these are all very connected to the SIM activity, especially fundraising, communication, and manager tasks are part of the daily activity of those who had indicated probably to be active with the public, but also as managers and organizers of the activity. But we also had an important proportion of researchers and therapists here. And in the other response, here you have the detail in the pie. We had a very diversified set of non-musical qualification and skills, going from psychology to architecture, or people working in care settings, etc. The last question about education, qualification, and training after the musical and the non-musical was a question specifically on the preparation on SIM activity. So if they had undertaken any specific, gone through any specific experience that could have formed, then train them to carry on SIM activity, against an important proportion, 67 said yes, and here you actually don't see predetermined options, but rather these are categories we have defined when we analyze the data, and so perhaps the most interesting thing here to note is that there is an important part of them gaining the specific skills in a post-qualification context and moment, so not through the music degree actually, and this also is okay. Here you have a detail of some examples of the responses for each of the 6 categories we have identified, and in particular the first 2 are really interesting in my opinion, because training on the job and contact with other practitioners define a context that is a sort of informal and collegial infrastructure of people and activities that through which the practitioner go and that give practitioners the possibility to become more effective in their practice. And in particular, there's two training on the job and contact with other practitioners. I'm going to read them because they are quite meaningful. So training on the job, this is one example. I've always taken advantage of any training opportunities offered by ensembles. This gives us a dimension of an activity that is learned by practicing the activity itself. And the other one, talking to others, listening, collaboration, reading, playing with a wide variety of musicians from different worlds. This is really an example of how this world, how this sector is sometimes informally reproduced and informally organized, to the extent that an important element in the training of a practitioner is the exchange with peer, the relationship with peers. So the other categories are interesting too, but perhaps we don't have now enough time. We can focus on them later in the debate, and I look forward to seeing your questions. Okay, so that's it for the education and training part. Question on the obstacles, very interesting too. We decided that it would have been interesting to divide the answers along three different categories. Here you see the answers that indicated obstacles within looking at SIM as a political economic system. And of course, here you have the vast majority of the response indicate funding as the main obstacles. And here in the bar, the green part, I think it's green, isn't it? It's for those who indicated funding as the only obstacle, so quite important. But of course, you know, you also have a different range of obstacles indicated. So someone gave more information and did not focus only on funding, but also, for example, on systemic problems. These are the different categories we have identified after analyzing the data. And you have 4 examples of the most recurring comments, I would say, about the obstacle question. Very interesting, in my opinion, is the systemic problems one. So permanent and stable professional positions are increasingly rare in the sector. It's not just a matter of funding, but also a problem of being recognized in the community as a stable entity providing specific services. So this is really the core issue. So the fact of being recognized as a professional, as someone who with a specific training and doing a specific profession, which is barely recognized as far as we understand from this comment. So this hasn't been the case so far for me, and the pandemic made everything even more difficult for us. So this is very meaningful of this kind of response, which sometimes overlaps with other categories, like the one of funding or systemic interest, lack of systemic interest, for example. But it's probably is the core issue, the central problem for many practitioners. So this not being identified as not just professionally speaking, but also in terms of the activity that is performed. We'll see later in the other category. For example, category 2 of the obstacles is for us lack of general understanding of or awareness of music's social value. And this is, first, it's quite recurring. 22 participants indicated some obstacles that may be included in this category, but also it connects to the lack of recognition, of professional recognition I was talking about, in the sense that, for example, the second one of these two quotes, also the wider view that community music is a soft subject, when actually many practitioners are very highly skilled and are often managing difficult situations very effectively and subtly. So there is a sort of conflict between the profile or the feeling also of practitioners, the fact that they are trained, they have gone through official, formal training or informal training, but they know how to do things. They have skills, they are skilled, but they are not recognized, not just professionally speaking by the system, but also by the wider community, seeing what they do as a soft subject. And it is interesting the way it continues, because he says, I am often faced with obstacles in the form of cooperation, willingness to support, ability to understand from other professionals in the institutions I work in. This practitioner works in prisons. So it's probably referring to other people involved in prisons as, I don't know, in any different positions in that specific context, and apparently not being convinced of, so to say, the power of SIM activity within that specific context. So this is very interesting. Is the representation of a malaise, of the feeling of being not taken seriously, so to say. The last of the category, the obstacles categories, is actually a little bit more complicated to explain, but we found three sub-categories here concerning largely problems about SIM practice, the practice itself, and also the profile and the attitude of the practitioners. And in particular here, I will briefly focus on the first of these categories. You see here, practitioners' background, training, or attitude, which I think it's more interesting for you. You have three examples. For example, the first is quite interesting because it points out a problem of attention to the characteristic of the target groups involved in the activity. The participants said often there is a lack of care about how and why people arrive at the creative setting. This can make or break a project before it has even started. You have to recognize the social as much as the music. And this is a very interesting comment, as it gives you the how complex this word is in terms of course, training and preparation. So these are people whose life, whose training, whose education has been including different words, let's say the musical word, the artistic part, and the social part. So very, very complex of experiences to have in a background in order to be prepared to this kind of work. And still there's a feeling that something is missing. Many participants indicated that they wanted to they looked for having more information and being more prepared to work with specific populations. For example, ethnic minorities are are indicated several times as a particularly not difficult group to work with, but a group that requires a specific preparation to be aware of all diversity issues involved. Okay, lastly, the question about COVID. As I said, it was an optional question and hidden. So here in the pie, you actually don't see the response of those saying, yes, COVID has affected my experience, or no. But actually, the yes are for those who accepted to answer the question, to respond to that question. And here you find the four different categories we have identified. And apart from those who, of course, have completely stopped the activity since the start of the pandemic, we found extremely interesting that a majority of respondents have actually continued. They carried on doing SIM activity. Of course, they had to change the strategies and the methodologies and the way they have delivered the workshops, for example, but and they also there's also an important proportion. You see here in the four different categories, four different examples of the response. Of course, there's an important part of them who have found very, very, very important obstacles to the activity and limits. So they were not satisfied about the way they had carried out the job. But also, for example, the last of these categories shows that that an important part and surprisingly important part of practitioners found unexpected benefits from remote and online work. And the specific response says, I have been made aware of a whole new way of working that will engage and connect with more people across the country and internationally. The possibilities have grown in the same way as the option locally have shrunk. And so this was quite surprising and interesting too for us, and also gave us some positive feeling for the continuation of the project, which is of course always under the unexpected and unusual and new and very constraining circumstances of COVID and all the restrictions in the 4 countries concerned. So thank you. I think I will pass it to John for the conclusions. So thank you for listening so far, and I look forward to your questions and comments.
Thank you very much, Alessandro. So I just want to go back over what we've told you and kind of pull out some headline findings, which we think we're pretty confident of, and you can see them there are the first 4. Firstly, SIM work is articulated as a public good, demonstrably meeting public policy goals of access, inclusion, and affirmation. Second, we've confirmed from our respondents that its core focus is children and young people. Almost every respondent in our sample has worked with young people. Thirdly, practitioners gain most of their specific skills not through music degrees or diplomas, but their motivation to start and continue is often socially oriented rather than music oriented. There is, however, a collegial, often informal infrastructure of peer support and workshops which equip practitioners to become effective. But by and large, those are generated, if you like, by the profession and the industry itself. They are not particularly or specifically connected to higher education, except in some limited cases. The 5th finding is that practitioners have acquired a wide range of non-musical skills and qualifications. And perhaps it's the fact that they have acquired those that is sometimes the starting point for them to get involved in SIM activities. 6th point is that building a sustainable career in this field is difficult. Funding is very often short time. There are very few permanent positions in this field for musicians wanting to do this kind of work. 7th, there is a lack of professional recognition, both from peers, but also from the wider sector and the public. And even some of the organizations that fund the work, some of our respondents say that they don't think that funders really understand what they're doing. And the 8th point is that there is still too little real public understanding of the work, and this could be sometimes lack of knowledge or prejudice. But finally, and it is a real silver lining, that COVID response indicates a profession with a significant degree of initial resilience. Remember that these surveys were started in October, and adaptability. So practitioners are familiar with alternative, hybrid, non-formalized options. That's where we've got to so far. We've got the next stage ahead of us when we delve more deeply into some of these issues through face-to-face interviews. But for the moment, that's where we've got to, and we hope that you have some questions and comments for us.
Thank you very much indeed, John and Alessandro. That was a really fantastic presentation, really, really interesting. And I'm sure that people have got questions. You should begin to start seeing people clapping you. Here we are. So who would like to begin? Is there somebody who would like to jump in before I do, or before Jeff does? Michelle.
Hi, John and Alessandro. I'm having some trouble with my internet connection, but tell me if I drop out or sound like a robot. I mean, this is fascinating. It's also relevant and important, isn't it? And you know, it's interesting that you say that there's not a lot of knowledge about this and the value of this kind of training, because it's vital and it's becoming all the more vital. And colleagues will probably guess what I'm going to talk about, which is that we're running a project which is so closely linked to some of your findings, and it would be brilliant if we can build on some of your findings. So we're running a project on how to equip students with these skills around entrepreneurship, like resilience and how you create something new and how you have an impact. And we've got some of the students here, we've got Hoda here. And it's so interesting to hear what you have found working, especially in different countries as well. My question is, if you could distill what you found so far into some advice for how we can better train our musicians to have this kind of social impact and better equip them to go out and show how these skills can be meaningful, what would that be for us? How can we implement this?
Well, that's a very challenging question, but of course it is the question which we have pinned our research on finding clear answers to. I should point out at this point, we've only analysed the UK data in any detail. The data from the other 3 countries is not yet ready. But it seems that anything that happens in higher education needs to connect up to the very, very rich network of peer-to-peer learning and informal learning that's already taking place in this profession, however loosely defined. There obviously is a lot of great practice out there. And I think one of the things that really could and should easily be done, and particularly since there are these strong regional clusters of practitioners, is make sure that your students get exposed to the practitioners doing this work in the Manchester region. That would be one thing off the top of my head. Alessandro, do you have something else you might want to say?
Yes, I would add to these ideas, which are basic. I would also stimulate perhaps the synergies and cooperations, interdisciplinary cooperations, in terms of, for example, speaking about formal education. In some responses, we found that participants wanted to be more trained and to gain an expertise in disciplines like sociology or anthropology, for example. They felt they couldn't understand specific contexts without that kind of expertise, and this was not provided in the training they had followed so far. So this is synergies, creating inter and cross-disciplinary contexts.
It's brilliant. Thank you. That's really, really useful. And it's interesting because, we can learn a lot from what you've just presented in this project. So it's fascinating the ways that we can build on things and work on this. Thank you. And the social angle is really nice, because I think what we're finding is that students are really keen on being equipped with skills that can make a difference to society and community. And we know that we need to do as much as we can to scaffold that and to feed that and to equip them with those skills. So thank you very much.
And thank you. Mea culpa, I completely forgot in my excitement that I wanted to give a message to those people who are watching this presentation on YouTube. If you have questions, please will you send them to research@rncm.ac.uk. They will be read and they will be passed on to the presenters. So I apologize for that, and thank you very much indeed. Michelle, you asked a question that was going to be very similar to mine. It was to do with the nature of training. What jumped out at me was the specific lack of preparation and training that your participants commented on. And I think I wanted to know a little bit more about the tension between the nature of training for work in this field generally and for particular projects specifically. And did you have a sense of people asking for general advice, training, relevant training, or for the specific projects that they were doing? I've noticed that our colleague here, Keith Phillips, has pointed out that some of the RNCM placement strands address this. And maybe when you've answered my question, Keith can come in. So Alessandro, would you like to say something about that?
I was muted, sorry. That's a very good question, and I didn't have the time to go through all the aspects of the findings. I mean, the findings of the survey. But yes, definitely we had very specific comments on how difficult it is to work in specific contexts, such as, for example, prisons. I mentioned these, but also there are a lot of comments pointing out logistical problems, going from structural problems such as lack of suitable spaces or good enough instruments, to, for example, problems in reaching out specific groups or keeping participants going to the rehearsals or the workshops in particular contexts. Of course, for example, disadvantaged communities are characterized by these trends, which are all remarked by our participants. And so this again gives a sense of a context that is really specific, and it includes, of course, a series of important experiences and background knowledge that go far beyond the musical experience. So one thing that I have remarked, it was very interesting. No one complained, or no one indicated any missing element or lack in the musical training. No one said I would have loved to be more trained musically, or with the instrument, or with even the perspective of teaching, for example, was not remarked. They either feel very confident with the training they have, or they just don't feel this as an important thing to improve within practice. On the other hand, we had a lot of very interesting comments pointing out lack of preparation of any kind concerning the social context, the public, the setting, and how to interact with all these components. So that's part of our it's an interesting part of our study, which is I hope bringing to some going back to the recommendation we may formulate. It's promising, I would say. I hope it will bring to interesting and possible factual information and indications for the future, for improving the practice. Sorry, John.
To add to that, I think one of the things which probably isn't highlighted in our research, because in a sense the participants are self-selecting, is that there is a very specific way of working musically, which is egalitarian and participatory and inclusive. And I kind of think we just take it as read that all the people who answered the survey know how to do that kind of inclusive participatory musical practice. We didn't ask questions in this particular survey about repertoire or anything like that. That's going to come in the interviews. But I imagine that there is a kind of core of just how to do participatory music with a group of people in the room of diverse abilities and so on, which could be somewhat generic. But then when you come to how do you deal with traumatized refugees, it's going to be a different set of issues to how do you deal with elderly dementing. And so in those kinds of areas, I think you would need very specific kind of modular approaches to particular groups of participants.
I mean, maybe I can ask Keith at this point, would you like to speak to this for our placements?
Yes, I mean, I would agree that it's very much in terms of the specific environments that people go into, they need training in those environments rather than something more generic. And I think from my experience, RNCM does this very well, which I know is blowing the trumpet of the institution that's employing me, but it does seem to be the case that the placements, for example, there's one strand which is a hospital placement where musicians go on to children's wards in a hospital, and they get very specific training before they're let loose in situ about how to even approach in that hospital environment, the hospital bed, how to interact. And the feedback that I've seen, there are two things I would say. That yes, it does seem that you may have some self-selection, because in terms of the general student, they were not prepared, and it was an eye-opener. And one thing they said was they were not used to improvisation. They were not used to being asked to improvise, being asked to learn a repertoire by ear and things like that. And thankfully, they were trained on all of that before they were let loose. It's very interesting field. Thank you as well, I should say, for the very interesting presentation.
So I think Jenny has her hand up.
Hi, yeah, thank you. Hi, John. Hi, Alessandro. Thanks very much for the presentation. Really interesting to see how the project has unfolded over the past couple of years. I was at the launch, and you know, it's nice to see it sort of moving forward. And there's so many fascinating things in here, and it's a shame we can't sit and have a drink afterwards, because I'd like to talk about lots of things. But I just wanted to pick that point up and then sort of move on to a different point. I mean, you know, my feeling is that you need both, and John, you know this because you've heard me say this before, but you need the nomothetic knowledge, you need the generic knowledge, and you need the idiosyncratic knowledge, how to apply that nomothetic knowledge to the individual context that you're in. And that's the, you know, the definition of pedagogy that I hold. And so my research is interested in the relationship between pedagogy and inclusion, and the question that's always driven my research and practice is, what is it in the musical learning that gives rise to these particular outcomes? So therefore, how do we, you know, train, teach, educate people to do it? But I think one of the things that I'd like to pick up on that was really interesting is the question of value. It kind of, you know, there's this undercurrent of value throughout the findings that you've presented, the sort of political value, the public value, the perceived value, and the sort of perceived undervalue of the work as well. And there's something that you highlighted about the sort of compartmentalization of practices. You know, people come at if you come at things from a clinical therapeutic you know, place, then you have a particular professional recognition that surrounds that. And if you come from a clinical psychology place, you have, you know, professional recognition. If you come at it from an artist or a musician, you don't have those kind of things. And the sort of value that's placed on your work, but you as a practitioner can quite undermine you, can't it, when you're working in different settings? And I just wondered what your sort of thoughts on this question of value, how it's kind of unfolding in the data so far, and whether that's something that you anticipated might come out at this stage. And of course, you can't guess what's going to happen in the interviews, but it'd be interesting to speculate on how that might unfold there too.
I could just say a brief word about that. It's very clear that the practitioners that took the time to answer this survey, and of course, as you said, as we all agree, they are self-selecting, highly value the work they do. It's clear that for many of them, it is a majority of what they do, and in some cases, maybe it's all what they do, and that's quite different to another perspective, which can sometimes one can pick up by talking to people, that what some musicians would really prefer to do is be playing on the concert stage. um, uh, and making recordings and winning prizes. But they've got to do some of this kind of work because, you know, it's there and they need to make a living and there isn't enough of the other kind of work. But I didn't get any sense of that in any of the respondents who answered our survey. They are passionate about this work. They care deeply about it and they believe it is really effective on the people that they're working with. Where their difficulties come with is some degree of undervaluing or lack of acceptance of the value of this work. They don't actually come out and say, by my professional peers who don't do it, but there's a kind of sense that there is not a parity of esteem, that people who, as it were, announce, perhaps at undergraduate level, this is where they're heading, might not get the kind of approval that they want from their peers.
I wonder if I can chip in. Anecdotally, but also from some empirical research that I did a long time ago with the volunteers and facilitators of a charity that ran groups for people with profound impairments and disabilities, and then more recently with Manchester Camerata. The people we talked to, and again, we were focusing on the practitioners rather than the recipients. And a theme that came out from both those pieces of research was that the work that the social, the work that they were doing in the social contexts actually had a really beneficial effect on their concert work or on their, their other professional practice. And I wondered whether that was something, that may be something that comes out of your interviews and your case studies further down the line. But is there any evidence of that from the survey you've done so far?
I don't think I remember seeing any statements like that. Alessandro, do you?
There, yeah, maybe we can, yeah, we remarked that in a question we asked about how important the SIM work is for the practitioners. The vast majority of them considered it as an important part of their not just their professional work, but also the artistic engagement. And so I think yes, we may definitely start thinking about these as something as a key importance in their lives, in their careers. But we definitely need to dig into this question in order to be able to say yes, this is key. Yes, this is less important. Well, again, we can connect this to the question on value, because as John said, we've seen that there's a disconnection, a contrast between personal value and the perceived public value of this thing, and we in the responses we could see this conflict. We could see this I'd say sad acknowledgement of the lack of understanding from the external world, including the society, the public debate, but also the specialist public or the media, for example. So yes, we'll definitely consider, and we are taking this question as one of the core questions for the interviews.
Fantastic, thank you very much indeed. Karin, I can see your hand is up.
Hello, John, Alessandro. Thank you very much for your presentation. While I was listening to what you were saying about the perceived value as compared with the value that both the musicians and probably the recipients, if you like, if that's an appropriate word, participants, put on it, it started to remind me of the problem with social care. It seems to me that we have a problem in the whole society about valuing things that are done for people, you know, that are not money producing, but they're done for people and could even be essential to their lives, literally, in different ways. I feel that this problem of value is a very deep one in the whole society, not just in this specific context, and that we need, as a society, to address that from government level also.
I could kind of respond to that by asking to what extent the concept, and this is just throwing it out to a group of experienced colleagues embedded in a conservatoire, how the concept of artistic citizenship meshes with all of this, because I think that what you're talking about, Karin, is part of what artistic citizenship is meant to, as it were, stimulate musicians to think about things that they may be offering which go beyond that which can be quantified or assessed or turned into money.
It's a really interesting question. You know, I was thinking when you said artistic citizenship, I thought about academic citizenship and how those of us who do academic citizenship do it really on top of our day jobs. But it seems all wrong to expect musicians who are on the whole so poorly paid to be doing artistic citizenship on top of their day jobs. And I think in a way that's the mindset that needs changing at a much higher level. And you've talked today about the UK, but I think it's going to be really interesting to see equivalent data for the other countries, because my sense is that in some other places, this kind of work is much more valued. But, you know, I'm not an expert on this. It may be that others have insights that we should be listening to. Jenny.
Yeah, thank you, John. It's a really interesting question, isn't it? And something that fascinates me is the government rhetoric surrounding well-being and how we need to be really concerned about everybody's well-being, particularly in the pandemic that we're in. And then this kind of perceived undervalue of anything that actually does contribute to real, people and well-being. It's an interesting tension. And then on top of that, there's the kind of discourse on employability that's coming through higher education, and the way that the funding structures are being sort of moved towards higher education as a commodity, and that it's going to get you a job and then you're going to contribute to the economy, etc., etc. And that really sits in tension with, we've certainly seen. It's interesting that somebody mentioned earlier about social responsibility, and a presentation I did to our Board of Governors a couple of weeks ago was talking about this, how our students are socially responsible. They're coming in at 18 with a really keen sense of wanting to contribute, and that kind of is, that there's a tension there with this notion of needing to go out and get a job and earn money. And so this is where the value question for me lies, and I think it will be really interesting to compare this to the other countries, particularly Colombia. I think it'll be fascinating to really see what the perspective is there. I guess it's a question of tensions, isn't it, and how we work through it and how we educate our students, as well as train them to be able to do things that's going to get them a living, I guess.
So I think there's a huge tension here. There's a kind of boundary dispute that we've skirted around a bit, where we've had long discussions about it within our team, that there are segments of the profession which kind of abut onto this, where it has been professionalized to the point that you can see yourself making a career, and a reasonably well-paid career in it. And one of these is music therapy, which is very much in some of the work that's now being done, aligned to the kind of thing we're looking at. Because music therapists are beginning to work more and more with groups rather than with individuals, and also in what you might call unstructured and undefined and elective contexts, rather than kind of it being prescribed by a medic and then you get a dose of music therapy. So music therapy is kind of cracking open a bit and having a much broader sense of itself. And then, of course, another professional pathway is music education. And, we haven't talked about this, but a lot of what school music teachers are doing in schools has a social element to it as well. The question is, do we want another professional badging of this work, so that before you can go and do any of the things we've been talking about, you have to have done a postgraduate qualification in social music for social impact? And I think that's not where I feel that the system wants to go, so that the thing becomes completely professionalized. It's keeping the thing in balance of, you are an artist first, and your primary training and allegiance is an artist. But what can you have, as it were, added to that to allow you to do this work without having to be, a dip, moose, social something, to, as it were, justify your position and some kind of sustainability of a salary.
I'm just looking for hands up, because I don't want to butt in if other people have got things that they want to ask. I think there's really been a change over time, because it seems to me that conservatoires who are employing people with Jenny's expertise and experience at high levels are actually putting their money where their mouth is. And that means that there's going to be a shift. And Guildhall was really the forerunner for this with Peter Renshaw all those years ago. And there are other places where there is really good practice. I know there's really good practice going on at the Royal College, but I'm sure there's good practice going on in other places as well. And I would like to see how this evolves over time. I think the other thing is, it's modeling from people who are well known in the profession, who are also doing social impact work. And I'm sure there are better examples than this. But I think of Yo-Yo Ma. Was it Yo-Yo Ma who took his cello along for his vaccination and sat and played to the crowd? I think about the musicians that Susanna Cohen and I interviewed recently about the way that COVID-19 had impacted on their work. And these were freelance professional orchestral musicians. And one of them talked for 45 minutes about, how lockdown had been for them. And then Susanna asked about what kind of collaborative music making he had been able to do, if any at all. And he said, oh, well, we go to, I can't remember which hospital it was, there's a bunch of us who go and play to the ICU doctors and nurses, and we do it every week. And, and it's fantastic because we're actually getting to play together, and we're playing, and we know that we're actually doing something useful. And this kind of had not even been on his horizon as something that he was doing that was really valuable, but was also giving him the opportunity to do what he most wanted to do, which was to play music with other people. Okay. Any other questions? Yes, Gavin.
Hello, thank you, Jane. And thank you, John and Alessandro, for this presentation. I was just wondering if earlier on in the presentation you mentioned the different kind of funding briefs, which is making these projects happen in the different countries. And I'm just wondering if you're going to be able to draw any conclusions about how funding briefs affect the quality of experience, the kind of experience that the projects deliver, whether you see any patterns forming.
It's early days yet, but it really is a very important question. And in this and other contexts, we have found a sense that the space that funders give for profound reflection, for acknowledging and learning from failure, is perhaps not optimal. That what funders want is, good news stories, smiling faces, nice end of project concert, 256 young people involved, done, on to the next project. And maybe that we just need to help. And one of the conversations that we want this project hopefully to contribute to is a more nuanced conversation between funders, organizations, musicians, and stakeholders, including the recipients, but recipients' families and communities, about it's not just about numbers. It's not just about, a wonderful moment in a concert where everybody claps and then the whole thing collapses. It's about sustainability, learning and coming back and doing it better next time. I remember talking to a colleague in one of the projects which has a connection to Guildhall School, in that it was started by Guildhall graduates, saying what people in the community need above all is the knowledge and the confidence that you're going to be there next week, next month, next year, and you'll just show up. And one of the things that people in marginalized situations are constantly experiencing is people paying attention to them for a short period of time, and then they're gone. And what we know from our own experience as musical learners is what has sustained us in where we've got to now is that weekly lesson over 5, 10, 15 years, and the slow growth of that. So yes, thinking about sustainability rather than short, sharp things that you can blow your trumpet about and then move on to the next project, leaving the constituents slightly high and dry, is something which I think we need much more deeper conversations about.
Thank you very much indeed. Gavin, I'm sorry I didn't notice your question. It was just a little bit too high up on my chat list. But I'm looking at the comments, and so many people, John and Alessandro, have said, thank you for the presentation and for raising interesting topics for discussion. Thank you for sharing this very interesting work. We look forward to hearing more as your work continues. So I think this is the point where I say thank you so very much. It's been absolutely fascinating. We really look forward to seeing how the work develops, and I'm sure that my colleagues and I would be delighted to work with you in any way that we can. Firstly, to contribute to the work, but also over time to promote it as well. So once again, can we please show our appreciation? So there you are, there's a clap from me. And
so much, and it's such a pity that we can't go to the pub now, which is what we would normally be doing at this point.
I know that is what we always have done in the past. So
soon the day when that will return.
It will. Can I ask Tom, can you turn